There was a knock on the front door, and Machir went to answer the door, and there stood Ziba, the authoritative look on his face while he stood in his gardening clothes. And he told Machir the news bluntly: David wants to see Mephibosheth now. Middle-aged Mephibosheth trembled. He was sitting on his mat in the corner of the room, and the cool breeze of the window was coming through. And yet, even in the heat of the day, he felt a cold chill run through his arms and his back. Now, finally, after all these years, King David had gotten to him. He's found him. And his life was going to now end. Fear was mixed with an overwhelming sense of emotion. It's not fair. Life is not fair. And he was concerned for Micah, his own son, for whom all this definitely was not fair. Mephibosheth was right. His life had not been fair. It had started out great. His father was Prince Jonathan. His grandfather was King Saul, the first great king of Israel. He was royalty, and royalty had privileges. And when he was young, everything seemed to come his way. Gifts, friends, fun, all because he was royalty. Back then, he even had a royal name. It was Merab Baal, which meant opponent of Baal. He would be one who was going to fight the false gods of the people in their land. But now his name was different. It was Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth means the son of shame. All because one day, everything in his life changed. You see, when he was a little boy, 5 years old, a bloodied and exhausted man ran into the palace gates and yelled, "King Saul and his sons are dead." The same cold chill ran through his body that day many years before. Back then, he didn't understand it. Suddenly, the palace around him became a place of panic. Wives were weeping. Servants were white with fear. Mephibosheth remembered his nurse running up to him with a few things in her hands. "Run, Merab Baal. Run for your life. Run." He didn't understand. He ran with her as hard as he could with his 5-year-old legs, but they would only go so far, and eventually he had to stop. And so in desperation, his nurse picked him up, Merab Baal in her arms, and she ran, and she ran. She didn't notice the chariot rut in front of her, and her ankle buckled, and she fell, and Merab Baal flew out of her hands, and he landed hard with a smack on his back. And Merab Baal didn't feel the pain in his back right away, and his nurse, weeping, seeing that he looked okay, picked him back up and kept hobbling forward on her sore ankle, for she had to get the young prince Merab Baal into hiding. It was a short while later that she discovered that Merab Baal was hurt bad. In exhaustion, she put him on the ground, hoping that he could walk or even run for a short while, but all he would do was fall to the ground. And she begged him to stand, but he couldn't. His back was broken. His legs and his feet were useless. On that day, the day that his dad, Prince Jonathan, died, his grandfather, King Saul, died in a battle on that day. Merab Baal's life went terribly wrong. His nurse took him to Lo-Debar, a city far away from the palace. His name was changed from Merab Baal to Mephibosheth. For who would be interested in a person whose name was son of shame? He had to learn how to live without legs. Oh, they were still there, but they did nothing. He had to learn to sit again. He had to learn to be carried by others. He had to learn to be cared for by others. He always had to pay special attention to his feet because they would develop sores quickly, and then they would take a long time to heal because of poor circulation due to a lack of exercise. His nurse continued to care for him, but living in secret without his dad, without his grandfather, was hard. Hard. It was hard for a long time. Life wasn't fair. He heard his grandfather had badly disobeyed God. King Saul again and again had tried to kill King David, who God had anointed and chosen as the king and Saul's successor. King Saul became his enemy to the point where he even sought out the advice of a witch. so that he could get some spiritual services. As a result, Grandpa Saul died, and so did Prince Jonathan, and Merab Baal, now Mephibosheth, for years would be left to fend for himself. Being the grandson of the enemy of the new king meant his life was on the line, because you never wanted the enemy's generations to rise up and take back their throne. And now Ziba is at the door. King David wants to see Mephibosheth now. Anger ripped through Mephibosheth's fear. How did King David know that he was here? There was only one answer: Ziba. Ziba was in charge of taking care of his property. Mephibosheth couldn't take care of the property because he was crippled. Ziba would want that property for himself. What better way to turn Mephibosheth in so the new king could eliminate him and all the property would fall to Ziba? And when the call had gone out, the king, for any member of Saul's household to be found, Ziba was quick to answer for his own benefit. There was nothing Mephibosheth could do. His legs did not work. He could not run. He could not fight. He could only face the end of his life with honor and go see King David. He felt like he was cursed because his grandfather and everything that went wrong for him, and at times he wished he'd never been born a prince, but there was no way of changing that, for Ziba was at the door. King David wants to see Mephibosheth now. Soldiers, the king's soldiers, forced their way into the door past Machir. They picked Mephibosheth up in their arms. They put him on the muddy floor of a chariot, and the race began across the country all the way to the city of Jerusalem. Without legs to cushion the shock of the rough cross-country ride to Jerusalem, his entire body ached. And then as they arrived there with no words or explanation and no sensitivity to his pain, the soldiers hoisted him up on their shoulders and they carried him in through the palace, through the gates, through the door after door. Some of these doors he recalled from his childhood. And finally he entered into the king's chamber where the throne was. And he was put on the floor down the steps from the throne where the King David was sitting. And Mephibosheth stretched out his hands, and he put his face to the ground, daring not to look at the king, hoping that the sword would fall quickly to end his life. Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth. David's voice didn't sound angry. Mephibosheth. Without even daring to look up, Mephibosheth answered, "Your servant." "Don't be afraid," King David said, "for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore you to all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat bread at my table." Mephibosheth couldn't believe what he was hearing. He glanced up, in fact, to see that it was King David who was speaking, and it was. And he quickly put his face back down to the ground, and he said, "Who am I that you should notice a dead dog like me?" Dead dog. It was a fitting name. It seemed anyone who opposed King David, the king chosen by God, was a dead dog. To oppose him was to oppose God. It was just like Goliath, as he was called a dead dog. Mephibosheth could not expect anything different. But as Mephibosheth wailed face down, waiting for the sword to cut through his body, waiting for the curse to do its worst, nothing happened. Instead, he heard King David make Ziba Mephibosheth's servant. And not only Ziba, but all of Ziba's family would be his servants. And all that belonged to his grandfather Saul would now belong to Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth was to be given a position of honor with King David at his table. He didn't understand why. And it took him a while. Because as he had this place of honor, he then began to find out that King David and Jonathan, Mephibosheth's father, had been very good friends. Some would say almost brothers, before Jonathan was killed in battle. He also discovered something very special about David, and that David had God's love in his heart. He wanted to show God's love and God's kindness to others, even to Mephibosheth. And it was God's love that brought him back to a place of honor in the king's palace. It was the love of God that made him a prince again in the kingdom. In a strange way, Mephibosheth's curse was now a blessing. Because of his broken back and his useless legs, he could never fight David as his brother Ishbosheth had did. His brother died opposing the Lord's anointed king. All Mephibosheth could do was hide in shame, and now the king looked on him with favor and with God's love. The king made him a prince again, and he was part of the royal family. The Lord made the promise to his children that he would turn their curses into blessings. Mephibosheth, the son of shame, discovered that that day he met the love of God and King David. When we think of Jesus and the story of the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes that he begins with in that sermon, he starts with the curse of the world. As we come into this story in Matthew, he had been healing the sick, the diseased, the demon-possessed in the land. And these are the people that began following him and led him up to this mountain. And there he sat among them, these rejects of society. These people who did not have God's favor, because if you had God's favor, you weren't sick, you weren't poor, you weren't estranged. You had blessings and property and possessions and generations to follow after you. And these people did not have that. They were the cursed. And Jesus sits here among this mess of people, and he begins this speech where he says, you, in the misery of your life, God is blessing you. His favor is at hand. You are fortunate because you are not removed from God's kingdom. It wasn't what they brought to the table that made them blessed. It was the approach of God in their life that gave them favor. If we were to guess it, we would have said Jesus would have picked the best speakers, the best trained, the best teachers, those who knew the Old Testament well and could recite it easily, but he didn't. He picked these outcasts, these lowly group of disciples who were not much better than this crowd and this multitude that was gathered around him. And he begins with his speech where he says, blessed are you who are poor in spirit, and those of you who are mourning, and those of you who are meek, those of you who are hungering and thirsting for God's right work to happen. Blessed are you who are merciful. Blessed are who are pure, peacemakers, and the persecuted. We have a hard time understanding this, and so I'd like to give you a new interpretation, maybe a new understanding of what these Beatitudes might sound like for us today. Blessed are those who doubt, those who aren't even sure and can still be surprised by God. Blessed are you who are spiritually impoverished and therefore aren't so certain about everything and can no longer take in new information. Blessed are those who have nothing to offer. Blessed are those where nothing seems to work. Blessed are those for whom death is not an abstraction. Blessed are those who have buried their loved ones, for whom tears are as real as the ocean. Blessed are those who have loved enough to know what loss feels like. Blessed are mothers who have miscarried or lost children. Blessed are those who don't have the luxury of taking things for granted anymore. Blessed are those who can't fall apart because they have to keep it together for everyone else. Blessed are the motherless and the fatherless, the alone, the ones for whom so much has been taken. Blessed are those who still aren't over it yet. Blessed are those who can laugh again when for so long they never thought they would. Blessed are those who no one else notices. The kids who sit alone at school lunch tables, the laundry guys at the hospital, the sex workers and the night shift street sweepers. Blessed are the losers and the babies and the parts of ourselves that are so insecure and so small, the parts of ourselves that don't want to make eye contact with a world that only celebrates the winners. Blessed are the forgotten. Blessed are the closeted. Blessed are the unemployed, the unimpressive, the underrepresented. Blessed are the wrongly accused, the one who never catch a break, the ones for whom life is hard, for they are the ones whom Jesus chose to surround himself. Blessed are those without documentation. Blessed are the ones without lobbyists. Blessed are foster kids and trophy kids and special ed kids and every other kid who just wants to feel loved and safe and never does. Blessed are those who know there has to be more than this because they are right. Blessed are those who make terrible decisions and suffer for it. Blessed are the burnout social workers and overworked teachers and the pro bono case takers. Blessed are the kids who step between bullies and the weak. Blessed are those who delete hateful homophobic comments off their friend's Facebook page. Blessed are the ones who have received such great grace that they are no longer in the position of ever deciding who the deserving poor are. Blessed is everyone who has ever forgiven me when I didn't deserve it. Blessed are those who are merciful, for they totally get it. You see, Jesus, who had his place in the kingdom of heaven alongside God with all of his power, chose to enter into this world as a weak, defenseless child. All the powers of the universe at his disposal, but did not consider that as something to be leveraged in this world. And as though to say, he shows up that you may hate your bodies, but I am blessing all human flesh. And you may admire strength and might, but I'm blessing human weakness. You may seek power, but I'm blessing all human vulnerability. This Jesus, whom we follow, cries at the tomb of his friend. He turns his other cheek to those who crucified him. Jesus is God's beatitude. He is God's blessing to us, the weak in the world, in a world that only admires the strong. And so this morning, if you feel forsaken or abused or unseen or no longer useful or ashamed at where your spiritual life is, if you, perhaps like others here, are all too aware that it's not your strength and your virtue that qualifies you to be called a saint, but your need for a God who makes beautiful things out of dust, then this community is for you. And the meal that we will share and take the bread of this table, this is for you. Because we are just like Mephibosheth, sons and daughters of shame, where life has thrown us some unexpected curves. And yet in that, the King has come to our door looking to restore us, to give us a place at his table and a place among the princes of his kingdom. Let's pray. Jesus, you've carried us on your shoulders. You've taken this curse of ours and you've made it into a blessing for us. And you use this to bring us to you so that we can be restored as sons and daughters of your kingdom, as sons and daughters of the universe, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. So God, we humbly stand before you, knowing that you know all of who we are, our thoughts, our emotions, our dreams, and our brokenness. And we surrender that to you and to one another as we allow you to make us blessed. In your name we pray. Amen. Rick, thank you for that prayer. Key line there, the soul's winter. Great words. Soul's winter is over, and life is beginning again. As we stumble into and try to get our heads around the Sermon on the Mount, this teaching that Christ gave us, I hope you come to understand that if you are filled with whatever shame that keeps you from drawing near to God, that you know that regardless of that, God is drawing near to you. and that offer is available to you. Would you stand so I can give you a blessing as we head into our week? May you know that you stand in the line of the Mephibosheth. That's not easy to say. Mephibosheths of the world, as those who feel like their lives are covered in shame. And yet Christ has come to make sure that we are redeemed and that we are given the King's bounty as we are given a place for bread at his table. May God be with you as you go into your week. Go in God's peace.